This will be a really quick update on what I've done on the Riley the last few days. I've repaired the head stud hole where it had rusted through from the inside by pushing in a sleeve. This is a brass sleeve. I carefully drilled out the head here on the drill press to keep everything perpendicular, and just slowly went up through the drill sizes until I had opened it out to 1/2 inch. And then I machined up a piece of brass bar to be a push fit into there, and then drilled through the center hole on the lathe, and then pressed the little tube into the hole I'd drilled. To help press it in, I made this little brass button that sat on the top, and then the hydraulic press pushed down on that. To seal it all, I used some of this Loctite 638 retaining compound. This is one of the newer ones. Apparently this works really well. So this sleeve doesn't go all the way through. When I drilled it out, I left a little step on the bottom there, so I didn't go all the way through to the surface that touches the gasket. So there's a little step, and the little sleeve pushes up to that step. I also used a little bit of steel epoxy on the inside, just to seal a gap where you could see the sleeve through the cast iron, just to smooth over that, and so that there weren't any little sort of edges that weren't sealed. The epoxy was a bit tricky getting in there, but I used this sort of, I think it's a palette knife, which Joss gave to me. This was really handy because I could sort of poke it into the holes and smooth out the epoxy inside there. I have gone over the rest of the head with a scriber and sort of poked around and tried to measure where I can, and that does seem to be the only really weak point. So, whoops, I'm sitting on my palette knife. So hopefully this head should be good. The other job I did, now that I've got the lathe set up to cut threads, is I've made up the gearbox mounting parts. So this picture, you can see this is the chassis rail here, and this is the bottom of the gearbox housing, the back of the housing where the universal joint goes. So I got hold of some high tensile steel. I can't remember the numbers for it, 4140, 4041, I can't remember which way around it goes, but that's proper high tensile steel. And on the lathe I machined up the stud, and this is actually a separate nut because the steel I had was only 20mm diameter, which is actually the biggest size I could get easily, and that happens to be the spindle bore size on my little lathe. So I used a standard nut on there, and that's held on with the red never come off Loctite, so that's not going to go anywhere unless you heat it up. I also, just as an experiment, tried some of the gun blacking stuff on it to give it that black color. It works okay. It's a bit patchy, but it's better than just raw steel, I think. I also machined up the little plates. This is just from 1/4 inch steel. They were just cut out using the angle grinder, and then I squared everything up on the mill. And the way this works, you've got these rubber blocks, and you can see the stud screws into the bottom of the gearbox. It passes through the chassis rail. The first block kind of goes through like that, and then you've got this little plate goes on there. You can see the two smaller holes, so there are bolts that go right through the chassis and through this whole arrangement. You've then got the little collar piece, and then this one kind of goes through there, and you can see how when the nut is put on the bottom here, I am waiting for the nuts to arrive, that sort of clamps everything together, pushes up hard against this, and that sort of locks this plate to the stud between these rubber blocks. And then this plate goes on the bottom, that isn't held by the nut through the bottom. So this is held to the car through the chassis rails, through the bolts that go through here. And that whole sandwich is what the back of the gearbox is sitting on. So I'm just waiting for the hardware I ordered to arrive from the UK. Somebody mentioned to me using Namric as someone to buy BSF and BSW nuts and bolts from. And I've used them in the past and they are pretty good. But I found somebody else whose prices were a bit cheaper, and so I've been using those. Thomas something fasteners. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but I'll put a link to them. The shipping costs from either company to New Zealand, I think I ordered about 3.5 kg worth of BSF nuts and bolts and things, and the shipping for that was £50, which is about 100 New Zealand dollars. But it should be here within a week, so that's the price you have to pay, and it seems worth it. So once those arrive, I should be able to start looking at bolting the gearbox that's under here. Oops. Bolting the gearbox to my temporary block. These are big long bolts. These are actually 8mm ones. These aren't correct. These were just temporary. Once the gearbox is bolted on there, I know exactly where the gearbox mount needs to go. This is where the stud screws into that. I can position that on the rear cross member, and then that gives me the position of where the engine mounts need to go. And then from that, I can mark where my brackets, the holes for the brackets need to go. So I'll have to drill those holes in the chassis, and then I can bolt all that together. And that will be the engine and gearbox bolted into the car, which is quite a big step. So I'm looking forward to being able to get that done.